Welcome to SVCH Talks, where innovation meets inspiration and every conversation sparks transformation. Here we unlock the future, share cutting-edge insights, and empower you to lead the way in a world driven by knowledge and discovery. Let's elevate together, because the next breakthrough starts here.
We're thrilled to have you join us for a day filled with insightful discussions, groundbreaking innovation, and transformative learning. Today, you'll have the unique opportunity to hear from industry leaders as they share their expertise, experiences, and best practices. Before we move forward, remember that you can obtain the micro-credential for this event. Just follow the instructions on our website. Don't miss this chance to certify your participation and learning. Now we're ready to start. Let's dive into the broadcast that our team has prepared for you. Enjoy it.
Hello, hello, hello. Hi, everybody. Welcome to this webinar hosted by Silicon Valley Certification Hub. And we are bringing key experts in artificial intelligence, technology, business to make this happen, to help you to understand and to everybody can understand how is AI changing our way of work, our way of think, our way to lead our companies, startups, and so on. And with us today we have Michael Frank. Hi, Michael. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Doing well. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here with us, sharing your insights.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to chat with you.
Amazing. So for those that you haven't heard about Michael Frank, first, you are missing a great opportunity to meet a great guy. And he is co-founder and CEO of Radiant Intel, which is an agentic AI platform for geopolitical risk, macro analysis, and policy intelligence. So he was previously a senior fellow at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, where he focused on AI and emerging technology policy. And prior to that, he led the Economist Intelligence Unit in Asia, technology and geopolitical policy research. And he holds a master's degree in public policy from the University of Chicago, or lovely University of Chicago, and a bachelor's degree in international relations and economics from Colgate University. So, Michael, did I miss something about you, or tell us a little bit more what you do in Radiant Intel and so on?
You didn't miss anything. The best part is, of course, our association. You and I going back to our days at University of Chicago. That's the one I'm proudest of that list. But no, I have spent my career focused on research and analysis, focusing on geopolitics and technology, and I was always doing this work the old-fashioned way myself, and public-facing research projects or advisory work for governments and businesses and nonprofits, and we're just living through this incredible decade. Looking backwards of the progress that is made, I started running experiments just to try to make my own research more productive, and sort of early machine learning techniques that were really didn't apply to this field at all, and unmitigated failures in experimentation, and moving through over the tools slightly improving, and okay, we might see a use case or something here that could be applicable. But with this new era of LLMs, I mean, it is a whole new ball game in terms of the capabilities of this field, and that's where we're doing at Radiant Intel, is giving people the capability of a team of researchers and analysts, expert driven, research and analysis so that they can focus on even higher value contributions in their organizations, focusing on strategy and engagement, the things that AI absolutely cannot do, full stop, right? And that's what I'm really excited to talk about here today is, what our experience has been as a startup in this new era, the types of themes that we focus on and what we're able to anticipate and predict, and where our view, at least, on where AI is headed.
Perfect. Amazing. So great. So let's have like this conversation. Like the idea of this talk is like to have like your perspective about AI, all public policy, geopolitical risk, and so on. And I will start with a question that I was like thinking, what will happen if LLMs and all artificial intelligence were deployed like 10 years ago? So, like it's based on statistics, what is likely, what is not. But what do you think they will for sure, they would for sure do not predict? So,
Yeah. Well, it's hard to say because it cuts both ways. I think it's a very interesting question because in some ways my answer is it wouldn't have changed anything. It just would have made us more certain. And the people who were right would be more certain that they were right. The people who ended up being wrong would have been more certain that they were right anyways. And let me give you an example that I think really crystallizes this. One of the big inspirations behind Radiant Intel, why we thought this made sense as a company, is the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Enormously destabilizing event with global consequences. And, even, organizations or governments that seemingly have no direct connection to this crisis, through second degree effects, found it to be very, very relevant, very important for them, thinking about currency markets and supply chains and sanctions and compliance and, international politics. I mean, everybody's affected by this. It's a great power invading its neighbor, right? So in I would say November, December of 2021, myself and my co-founders, some of which were our former members of the intelligence community here in the US, we had kind of independently come to the conclusion that Russia is going to invade Ukraine this winter. And if you'll recall from the news reporting at the time, not everybody agreed. And the reason we felt confident was because we had a worldview, essentially our model of how great powers behave, how Russia specifically behaves throughout history, how to interpret the moves that they were doing, putting troops in essentially encircling Ukraine, and how does that compare to previous deployments that were just exercises as opposed to what eventually became the actual invasion. So we were ultimately right about that. But the question that you asked is, would AI have predicted that? And my answer to that is not without human help. So if we had given this information that we had collected about what Russia was doing and said, given our worldview, which is this is ABC, this is how Russia historically behaves, this is how great powers behave, this is our interpretation of military strategy and diplomatic rhetoric, how would you analyze this solution? Make a call. Is Russia going to invade Ukraine? Yes or no? The LLM would have said, yes, Russia's going to invade. But if you had a different worldview, which is driven by, there's a school of international relations that focuses on interconnectivity and trade. You said, well, no, Russia's not going to invade because there's too much at stake in terms of trade with Europe. All this gas that is exported to Europe goes to Ukraine, and an invasion is going to be enormously destabilizing, and they're just posturing. Now, a lot of experts felt that was the case and then predicted that Russia would not invade. Obviously, they were wrong. But AI, if those experts were using AI, they would have still been wrong, right? And this is, the reason I share this anecdote is because AI is a reflection of the people who are using it. And yes, it is incredible. It can help us do things that before we just didn't have the skill set to do. I love using AI as a coding assistant, even though I'm not a software engineer by training. Does that mean that, I can replace the work of our colleagues in software engineering and Radiant Intel? Absolutely not. They are still much, much more powerful when they have the AI, because they have that domain expertise and the worldview about how their field operates. And I could give you tons of examples like this one, but this to me is the archetype that explains my short answer, which is it depends.
I love it because you mentioned really well that it's not that the LLM per se will be the prediction of everything, but the worldview also, it's super relevant for all those processes. And thinking about that, do you believe that AI will eventually understand the best strategies, the policies, the way to communicate better? Well, how to do it better than governments, maybe within the next decade, or how do you see like the next years going? What will happen?
Well, I think there's two ways of answering that. One is it can already do it better than a lot of governments. One thing that comes to mind is a few years ago I was sitting in a meeting I was in a meeting with government ministers from a fairly large Asian country. I won't name the country to avoid throwing anyone under the bus, but sitting in a meeting with government ministers from that country, it was sort of like a strategy meeting, and they were talking about technology. And a deputy minister of communications was talking about 5G at the time. This was probably 2018, 2019. So 5G was very much the next thing in the technology space. And the Ministry of Communications, that's their jam. They're all over that, right? Spectrum and communication strategy and technology infrastructure. And as this deputy minister of communications was speaking, it became clear to me that he did not know what 5G was. He just had no idea. He was throwing, oh, well, do we need 5G? We just had 4G. Before we had 3G. Next they're going to be telling us 6G. It was clear it was just kind of treading water. And in those types of situations, AI can already provide domain expertise that we see in the real world empirically policymakers don't have in some cases, right? Now, at the same time, it is important not to overstate what LLMs can do. And in some ways, I feel like the paradox of our company is we have a very dim view of what LLMs can do, which is we treat them like language processors. That's really it. We don't ask the LLM to do any reasoning. We give it, instructions about how would we reason in our system when we look at information. If, Michael Frank, I've spent a lot of my career in China looking at, Chinese policy documents and trying to come to conclusions about what the heck was going on in Beijing. If I was able to read 300 Chinese policy documents a week, what conclusions would I come to? And in our system, we don't put that intellectual load on the LLM. We give it deterministic instructions, which is, this is how I would evaluate these things. And so in the coming years, I really don't expect LLMs to be, I don't think that's how we're going to reach AGI or super intelligence in the next few years. And I think that's a whole nother conversation about, where the AI research community is at. But, I think what is undoubtedly true is systems that use LLMs as infrastructure are going to get very, very powerful. And it's a question that governments are going to have to grapple with, but one that I would argue, there's a lot of upside because governments everywhere, money is always an issue. Budgets are strapped. You need to deliver more for your citizens next year than you're doing this year. And at the same time, you have, obligations on the budget that keep going up and up and up. And you got to make these investments, and it's really tough to do. And people, I'm sitting here in Washington today, and this year the government has really been asked to do more with less. And people who are still, who haven't left government or been laid off, have more on their plate than ever before. And how are they going to perform at a higher level, which is what the public expects? They're going to need to use technology. But the good news is that, technology is developing, and it could be very, very complementary to, a workforce that I would argue is, already overstretched.
So thinking about kind of the use of AI by governments, also like everybody is concerned about layoffs, right?
Yeah.
In the government, in companies, like in general. So how do you see that this will change the dynamics in society? And more like thinking about the government, like what the government can do, like to reduce the risk of a high unemployment rate or things like that.
I think this is a relatively controversial opinion, but so I recognize that, but I think we are worrying a little bit too much about the effects of AI on employment, in my opinion. And I think the reason I say that is because AI, yes, it is a transformative technology. The way maybe there's been, not since electricity or railroads have we had, a wave of technology that I think will transform all of society as much as AI will. But this progress, it does not happen overnight. Yeah, it looks to us when ChatGPT pushes a new update, or over the last month we've seen Gemini, seemingly come out of nowhere to be arguably the best model. Looks like this is happening very rapidly, and society is going to struggle to adjust. But if you look at employment statistics, if you look at both currently, but then also you look at the historical trends, there are always more jobs that are created over the course of a major wave of technological disruption. That's not to say we shouldn't be mindful of the political and social implications of technological change. But, we see it very, very strongly, like I mentioned before, even in sectors or in jobs rather, where there are, appears to be a high degree of substitutability between what AI can do today and, what a human can do. The jobs are just evolving. And so, software engineer, I think, is, the people in that field. If you're graduating right now as a software engineer, you might feel a little bit nervous and concerned about, well, is there going to be a job for me? Because all I'm hearing about is agentic coding and all this percentage of all code is going to be written by AI. And in the future, there, will just be one product manager overseeing things. I don't buy that, because somebody who has a 4-year education in software engineering is so much more capable with AI at their disposal than I am, right? And that's even me as leading an agentic AI startup, let alone, people who are only using ChatGPT casually, or maybe they're not even using AI really in their work. So I remain quite optimistic that society is ultimately going to be able to manage the employment disruptions. And even, this on the social side, I think we tend to, we point out things that scare us about the future. But once we name the thing that we're scared about, we adjust. And, 2 summers ago, I remember I was doing research here in DC at CSIS, and there was a lot of concern about deep fakes. And the next year, 2024, was like the year of elections. Half of the world's population was voting, massive elections all over the world, the US, India, many elections in Europe and South America. And we're concerned about, are people going to be able to separate truth from fiction, or are deepfakes going to manipulate all of these elections? And it turned out deepfakes were not a problem. I can't think of any elections where there were questions of election integrity because of deepfakes. That's not to say that deepfakes didn't, there were things that popped up and bad actors trying to do that type of thing. But society adjusted to recognize that, well, AI generated content is now a thing. I need to be aware. And I think people evolved quite quickly and weren't tricked by those things. And I think we need to give society more credit than sometimes we do, that we think of the average person as this helpless, credulous individual that's just going to see an image or a video and immediately believe it. That's not true. I think in most societies, the average person is more discerning than that, and the evidence has played out that way. So I also feel more optimistic about those types of things too, and I think we should avoid being heavy-handed as a result.
Totally agree. By the way, I want to say thank you to Mark Sartell, that he wrote that he's really excited about this discussion. So for everybody that is live on this event, feel free to ask any question, and we can discuss during the conversation or maybe at the end. So following with what is happening in society with AI. Also, AI is analyzing, and your models are analyzing a lot of really interesting data around and what is happening in society. So what do you think, or what's the most uncomfortable truth AI is revealing about the world so far?
Ooh, that's a scary question. I think the most uncomfortable thing is it is what it reveals about us, what it reveals about human nature. And that is not necessarily a bad thing. It's just, if you, let me give you an example. In the United States, we have had a sort of stalled effort to protect people's privacy online for many, many years at the national level. This is actually, not talked about that much. In DC, it's actually not controversial. It's not a partisan issue. Democrats and Republicans agree there should be a national safety standard. A privacy standard. They largely agree on what that should look like. And at the same time, we've not done anything on it. And the reason is because there is no political pressure to protect people's privacy. And where does the political pressure come from in a democracy? It comes from the public. And, we can say things like, well, the big tech companies don't respect our privacy, and, and our politicians are corrupt and they're not. But the reality is, us as users, as consumers, by and large, don't care. And what I mean by that is, you look at the way we use these tools. People are using ChatGPT like it's a therapist. People are using it to just resolve disputes. And, here's a situation I was in with my family or my boss, very, very personal information, putting in health information, very personal, identifiable information that in this case, I would argue it's fine for people to use the tool if they understand, there are privacy risks, and you need to have education and inform people so that they don't think that they're talking into some vault. And next thing you know, that information's online, and there needs to be accountability when companies don't live up to their expectations. But I think especially in the policy domain, when we talk about how to regulate AI or what AI should be able to do or what AI shouldn't be able to do, when we compare those discussions that are often very high-minded and have lofty ideals to how people actually use the technology, there is a big gap. And I think that's, for me, to come back to your question, what's the most uncomfortable truth? And I think there are tons of other examples that are, arguably more entertaining and grittier. But that when you ask me, what does it reveal about, I think that's the interesting thing for me, is what it reveals about us, and how we engage with technology.
Totally. I'm thinking now about a business leader, like today. Like, what do you think are the global risk that they need to pay more attention, and maybe they are underestimating?
There are many, and I think part of the reason why we have a company is because we think this space is dramatically underserved. And if you look at how anticipating risk, how does this industry work today? I did this manually for many years. You have an expert analyst who focuses on their field. They have their go-to sources that they think represent signal. You can probably read at most 20 hours a week if you're an excellent analyst, because you have other obligations. You have to actually go present the information you learn to your clients, or to the media. You've got to manage a team of analysts. That takes time. And so you're just not seeing the full picture. Even still, what are the big risks? It's the things that you can see with that snapshot. It's geopolitical risk and the international system going through an evolution. I would argue it's a bipolar international system, not a multipolar system. A lot of people are I think, incorrectly identifying the current state of the world as multipolar when it is in fact bipolar. But there are a lot of new problems that emerge from that around supply chains and conflict and misaligned interests. And that is, if you have a global business or anything that touches international commodities, you really need to be on top of these things, because things are changing very, very quickly. But, again, that's what I'm describing, just seeing sort of the high level. If you have a tool like ours, which enables you to see everything, I mean, what our system ingests on a given day is like, it would be the equivalent of if you as an expert, there were 200 hours in the day for you to just read, right? And I'm saying there's, maybe at most you get 20 hours a week to read. With our system, you get 200 hours a day to read. Now you're seeing a completely different set of issues that emerge that don't show up in that snapshot. And one example of that is, we have been pretty aggressive in our assessment of the state of the Chinese economy. For example, this year, starting over the winter time, when we emerged from stealth, we were publishing reports for our clients, and we put out some of this externally. But our view of our assessment of the Chinese economy was it was terrible. And China hands, China experts, China watchers, these are people with economics degrees and have spent time in China. They were doing this manually and just looking at the snapshots, and the snapshots still didn't look that bad. But what we looked at were a lot of, official documents and statements and market transactions. This is all open source information, but any individual artifact that you'd look at would be totally boring and mundane. But when you look at 10,000 of them, you start to see a pattern. And that has been, a big change, I think, for us is we have to be willing to believe our own system that, we telegraphed earlier this year and said, actually, we think, China experts are getting this wrong and saying that the economy is a mixed bag. It's actually really, really bad. And like the technology sector is just this lone bright spot, but the rest of it is atrocious. And now I would argue the industry consensus has arrived where we've arrived at, but that's been, they were a few months behind because they didn't get to see that whole picture. So I think, what do businesses and organizations need to be aware of? We live in a globalized world. At the same time, this globalized world is becoming fractured. There are great power tensions at a level we have not seen in decades. We have war in Europe. We have supply chains that are straining from both environmental changes and policy changes in the form of tariffs and breaking down decades of international trade practices. And if you have any touch point in in the global issues, whether it's politics or economics or geopolitics, you need to be aware of these things. One of my favorite use cases is think about like a 5 location supermarket in Nebraska, local chain, and they're only serving people in the Omaha area, and they've got 5 stores. Is that a global business? You might say no. I would argue it is, because the commodities that they're buying are globally traded, and prices, inflation, supply chain resilience, this all affects them. The war in Ukraine affects that supermarket because Ukraine is one of the largest producers of wheat and sunflowers in the world. And those are 2 really, really important crops if you're selling processed food, right? So I think there's just this whole treasure trove of risk to be studied out there. And, we make it easy for those small companies, a company like that supermarket chain in Nebraska, to get access to these insights that they didn't have access to before because it's just prohibitively expensive. And I think, what I'm most excited about is seeing the small players that leverage systems like ours to totally change the nature of their business and mitigate risks before they even appear and make the world feel a lot more predictable and knowable.
Thank you. And I see that we live in a globalized but fractured world, and like even the small like village or store have an effect of all what is happening with the war in Europe, with the trade market, like everything what is happening. By the way, thank you, Fabricio. He's saying this is amazing. Thanks to share with us. I'm thinking about the AI at the end is statistics. So it has a margin of error and also some predictions. You mentioned in the at the beginning to that worldview also affects that. But what do you think are other reasons behind that failure?
Yeah. Well, and I remember being in our statistics classes together at University of Chicago, and looking at some of these things, and we're wondering how is this going to be useful in the future. In the future, and now I feel like it's very, very useful if you have an understanding of statistics to get a sense of why AI models fail, and then also how you fix it, because it is a solvable problem. And the short answer on why AI models fail, and this will probably be familiar to many people in this call, but the short answer is because they're probabilistic models. And because you have so many parameters, we're talking hundreds of billions of parameters in these larger models. And even the small models, we're talking about over 1 billion parameters. There's no way to isolate a variable and say, okay, well, variable number 267,000 is responsible for these types of outcomes, because everything moves together. So this is when people talk about AI being a black box. It's, you can't just isolate an AI, one part of an AI model to make it deterministic. So to some extent, you're always guessing what is going to come out. Now, the magic of large language models until recently has been by adding more scale, you make that guess pretty darn good. And the solution, even in a world where, you know, hallucination risk has fallen dramatically in recent years. You know, 2-3 years ago, there was a study from Stanford on AI in the legal field, and it estimated that, you know, AI hallucinated like more than a third of the time. It is unusable, right? You can't use a tool that's hallucinating a third of the time. And today we're talking about hallucinations, you know, in these benchmarks where it's down to, you know, a few tenths of a percent, maybe at most. I mean, so performance and fidelity has gotten much, much better. We see it actually even lower in our system because, again, we don't give it the reasoning tasks. We give it the easier intellectual lift. And so if you're just asking it to process information, not reason, it's, you know, the risk is even lower. But I give you, this is a you know, free advice, free tip for anyone building agentic AI. You know, one easy remedy here comes from those statistics classes that you and I were taking at UChicago, is Bayesian probability. Just put more models at it, and you will reduce the risk that all of the models fail on a given problem. And so you could even, this is as simple as you have a query for you have a chatbot, you ask the chatbot a question, it gives you a response. You take that response and your initial question, give it to another chatbot and say, does this look like a hallucination to you? Yes or no? And now that's a simple version. You know, if you're building enterprise SaaS like we do, you got to make it a bit more complicated than that. But that is a way to reduce the risk of hallucination to functionally zero. And in our system, basically, things will break before it gets to a client that's hallucinated. Full stop. You know, there's just almost no risk in our system of something reaching a client that's hallucinated. That could change. You know, we've had deployments where hallucination risk ticked back up. New architectures, reasoning models first suffered from this problem. And it's something to be mindful of. But sometimes, you know, we run into resistance from clients and potential clients along these lines, and they say that they have the same question, which is, you know, we're really, really worried about this hallucination thing. Should we not be? And, you know, my answer is, of course, you should worry. You don't want fake information, you know, or things coming up that plausibly look right but aren't. You know, that's the nightmare scenario. If something looks obviously false, that's, you know, it's easier to deal with. But there are mitigation steps, and, you know, you can be concerned about hallucination risk, but also rest easy knowing that, you know, an enterprise grade solution is going to be able to address those things for agentic AI.
And with how is everything moving, I have maybe a basic question that you can help me to understand, like how the leaders, like companies, governments, what is the traditional like intelligence methods like they used like maybe years ago, and how is changing with the solution that you are building or other solutions with AI? Like what is the main shift, and also like what's the effect like of having maybe more data or more accurate or better predictions? Like if you can help us to visualize that.
You know, the way this field has historically operated is you're searching information, Google was great tool, that made people more productive. Before that, you had to, go to a library. Before the internet, you go to a library, check out a book. But the way people operate is, you search something, you find something that looks plausibly interesting, you read it. If it's not interesting, you rue the wasted time and you discard it. If it is interesting, you might take notes on it or save it for later. And then you move on to your next source. And you're kind of essentially, so much of, I think, being a good researcher, it starts with source curation. What are the things that actually give me signal about the research question that I'm answering? And if you're in an organization, we have investors that use our platform, and they're looking for differential returns in the market. We have clients that are in public policy and government affairs teams, and they're looking for possible threats to their business that they can alert their commercial teams for. And it's very, very manual, but going through that source curation process. And we essentially handle that for you. We are experts in source curation. So we go find everything that could conceivably be useful. Now, the next step, historically, you've curated these sources. Now you need to, there's got to be like a so what, right? That's transitioning from research to analysis. The way I've thought about this, in my career is, if you're just curating sources and writing down what the sources say, that's research. Once you then go the next step, which is thinking about what are the implications of this, that is analysis. And to do good analysis, you need experience, you need expertise, you need a worldview in the sense of, how this, in my line of work or in my organization, what are the things we care about? What are the things that keep us up at night? What are the things that make our eyes fill with money if we're in a business? What are the things that make us feel a lot more confident in the next election if we're government, that we're doing a better job for people? There's an element of greed there too, right? It's not just fear, but you need some sort of view of the so what. And we can't replace all of that. We can't replace that full work stream, because ultimately, we are not in the positions of understanding, we don't understand the context of every one of our client organizations, because they have private conversations with each other. They're in meetings with their external stakeholders. They have access to their information of how their business is doing, or, if you're in the government, classified information that we can't see. And we say, that's great. Like we are going to do the first part of that step for you, which is source curation and sort of the initial and analytical scan, which is before you connect it to that context dependent information. What are the things that, if you can articulate how you would analyze all these sources in a somewhat repeatable way, we can handle that for you. So I think that's kind of how I think about the evolution from, the manual way of doing this type of intelligence work to what I think will be the dominant paradigm in the next 5 years, which is essentially the human researchers are going to move up dramatically up the value chain and focus only on the highest value tasks for their organization, both for the private sector and for government. And that sort of initial work is going to be handled by AI systems like ours.
So now imagine what will happen if every CEO will access now to your tool, to your to Radiant Intel. So what decisions do you think would instantly change the worldview or overall across the whole organizations, and that impact that could happen in general?
If you're a CEO, especially the bigger your organization, from what I can tell, one of the biggest challenges is you're sitting at the top of this information funnel. And the organizations I've been at I've had the privilege of working in organizations that were led by excellent CEOs. And one of the things I think the excellent ones did well was they understood that they were in this information funnel. First of all, you just don't interface with people as often as you would like to because of the nature of the job. And then people don't always, push up negative information because they're, concerned about the consequences, right? And maybe they don't push up information that looks bad for them or has negative implications for them and their team. And that's something we do have among our users. We have CEOs. It's not we have other people in their organization too that are using this, but we do have CEOs who look at this information. I think a big part of it is because there is a massive opportunity to help CEOs make better decisions. It's not replacing that funnel. There's a reason we have bureaucracies, right? And I'm not saying we should just get rid of corporate structure, but it does enable you as a CEO to make better decisions if, in addition to the information you get from your team, so you're mulling over, we have to make a massive investment in our manufacturing facilities in the next 3 to 5 years, and we're deciding between China, Mexico, and the United States where to expand. And as a leader of a manufacturing company, I would want to know what is sort of, if we can remove people's, more parochial concerns, remove the filter that information naturally flows through, and you get just the only filter is then coming from Radiant Intel, where we don't have skin in the game, right? Our job is to get you the most accurate assessment that's relevant for your organization. And is that going to change whether you decide to, spend more money expanding facilities in China, or relocate production to Mexico, or relocate production to the United States? I think you're going to see a lot of decisions change. And this is good for everybody because it means, you could open up much greater productivity and eliminate a lot of inefficiencies. So much of economics, and Alejandro, I know you know this from UChicago as well. There's so much waste in society because of asymmetries in information. And if you're a leader, the best thing you can do to make better decisions is try to break through those as much as you can.
Yeah, totally. Asymmetries of information is like the big problem that happens in society, and that's why there's a lot of problems.
Yeah.
But good. Like, just to finish this conversation, last question, and this is more about how do you see how the future will be. So is it any signal, any information or something that made you say, oh my God, people are not ready for what is coming? So how do you see what we need to prepare for?
Let me give you a small example that I think makes me very, very optimistic about what AI can do, because this is a relatively tiny thing. This is not even AI. I was just in China for a work trip, and part of why I go to China is to hear directly from people who I think are plugged in on Chinese politics and economics, to understand how are things changing. And so that's why I like to go there and be on the ground. But I hadn't been in a while because of COVID and COVID era restrictions and not being able to get in easily. And so this is my first time back in Shanghai in 6 years. And the first thing I noticed, Shanghai, this is a city of 25 million people. It's one of the biggest cities in the world. I lived there in 2012, 2013, and I always just remember the energy and the noise. I mean, it's just a noisy place, which is great. It's exciting. It gets a little bit old after a while, but it's exciting. I noticed this time the streets are very, very quiet, and it's because of the proliferation of electric vehicles. And again, this is not even an AI story. This is just a technology, broader technology story. When all of your cars on the road are electric vehicles, you solve so many problems that you didn't even think about before. And one of them is noise pollution. And I went from Shanghai, and then once we left, back in another big city, and you then the noise of the traffic is just driving you insane for a little bit. But you don't even know how great that is, right? And AI, whether it's with driverless vehicles, which I think have the potential to reduce loss of life by a factor of, I mean, these are insane numbers, what we're seeing about how much safer autonomous vehicles are than humans behind the wheel. How many people are killed and maimed in car crashes every year? Like this is going to change society for the better in ways that we really cannot comprehend, and it's going to feel like it's overnight. I mean, it's going to be very, very cool. And looking at applications of AI in healthcare, and robotic surgery and drug discovery and treatment, identifying novel treatments for diseases that right now are incurable. We talk a lot about this, but I don't think we really appreciate what it's like to go from a world in which people often die of cancer to a world in which nobody dies of cancer. The closest thing I could think of is the advent of antibiotics, 100 years ago, and then proliferating around the world, where people used to die of, today, what we consider relatively routine bacterial infections, would die all the time. And to just all of a sudden have technology available that pushes us through this new gate, I think it makes me incredibly optimistic. And, in some ways, we're not exactly like doing the most interesting, transformative work on a societal level in the intelligence space. But I do think that companies like ours in healthcare, in working on clean energy and urban planning and education, there are going to be massive transformations in the next few years that we really cannot comprehend, no matter how many conferences we go to or thought leadership pieces we write. Like it's something we're going to have to experience for ourselves. So I'm very optimistic, and I'm looking forward to living in that world where AI has enabled, this sort of incredible transformation in a short amount of time.
I'm happy that you are optimistic, because there are like people that are not that optimistic, but happy to see that you see a right
Look,
view.
I understand why people are scared too. And it's like I was saying before, it's not that we shouldn't name the thing that scares us. Like I mentioned with deepfakes, yes, there are possible risks. The Terminator, the Matrix, these science fiction, fears that we have. It's not impossible, but let's name it, and then we will take the steps to mitigate that risk while capturing this enormous upside. And I think it's just important for us to not lose sight of the fact that the downside risk, it is possible to mitigate. And I would bet on us mitigating it. And the upside benefits are so profound that it's worth doing the work and pressing ahead, because it's going to make everybody better off. These types of transformations, the vast majority of humans who have ever lived have not lived through a transformation like this. This is going to be, if not wholly unprecedented, at least unprecedented for everyone who's alive today.
Totally. Perfect. So amazing insights. I love what you are doing. You are changing a lot of things like behind the scenes. But yeah, changing all the intelligence methods from big companies. So it's like really amazing. Really, I'm happy that you are working on that and have a bright mind, like supporting all the intelligence teams around the world.
We love what we do. It's incredibly rewarding, and I'm just always blown away by seeing, I think what we do is clever, and then I see how our clients use our platform, and I'm just blown away at it's really cool. Every one of our clients is smarter than me, and I enjoy learning from them too, seeing how they apply these tools.
Amazing. Well, and where the people can find you, like, or contact you, like, if you have, like, I don't know,
Please reach
something
out.
to share?
Shoot me a note on LinkedIn. Check out our website at radiantintel.com. I post on LinkedIn every now and then. I've got an X account as well. But yeah, please reach out. Would love to hear from everyone. And do give Radiant Intel some consideration if you're trying to learn more about the world. We'd love to help.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Michael, for your insights, for this great conversation. You, like all the audience, how you can reach out to him. And thank you, everybody. Thank you, Michael. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Bye.